All right, let's dive in. Today we're exploring a moment that really, truly reshaped a continent, the 2015 European migrant crisis. Now, this is a complex story. It's got politics, human tragedy, and a whole lot of unintended consequences. So let's just get right into it.
Okay, so I want you to picture this. Imagine you're standing on the northern coast of the Greek island of Lesbos. From right there, you can actually see another continent clearer than you can see the next Greek island. That's Turkey, just 5 miles of water away. This short stretch of the Aegean Sea, it's a frontier, a porous, contested line between two worlds.
And this is the price for crossing that line, $1,500. That's the going rate for the final leg of a very long journey, often crammed into a cheap plastic dinghy, a boat that people smugglers tell you is just for a river crossing. It is an incredibly high-stakes gamble for a foothold in Europe.
Now, for years, these islands were known as Europe's soft underbelly. And you have to understand, the crisis in 2015 didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was really the breaking point after a steady flow of arrivals met shores that were already struggling with their own deep economic problems.
The history of these islands adds a really crucial layer of context here. See, back in 1922, they welcomed hundreds of thousands of ethnic Greeks who were fleeing Turkey. But there was a key difference in how people saw it. Those arrivals were seen as returning home. The newcomers in 2015, they were viewed very differently, as people fleeing distant conflicts, often after they had already passed through several other safe countries.
So who were they? Well, the Syrian civil war was a huge driver, for sure, but the flow was actually way more diverse than that. You had people coming from Afghanistan fleeing a resurgent Taliban, they came from Pakistan, they came from all over Africa. It was basically a global migration, all converging on this one narrow channel into Europe.
So, the situation on the Greek islands had been simmering for years. What was it that tipped the scale in 2015? What made it all explode? Well, the answer, and the real catalyst for the crisis, it didn't come from Syria or Afghanistan. It came from hundreds of miles away in Berlin.
And the shift happened with just breathtaking speed. I mean, think about this. In May of 2015, Germany was expecting about 450,000 asylum seekers. By August, that number had almost doubled to 800,000. And then, on August 25th, a single tweet from an official government account announced Germany would stop sending Syrian refugees back to their first point of entry. And that message went viral.
And then came the moment, the one that really defined the whole crisis. On the very last day of August, German Chancellor Angela Merkel holds a press conference. She declares that Europe has a moral duty to act, and then, speaking to her own people, she delivers this landmark phrase, "Wir schaffen das." We can do this. In that moment, the doors of Europe were thrown wide open.
The impact was immediate, and it was overwhelming. Forecasts for arrivals quadrupled in just a matter of months. Neighboring countries like Hungary, which saw 400,000 people transit its territory that year, were completely swamped. A decision made in Berlin sent a human tidal wave across the entire continent.
But behind all the big numbers and the policies, the crisis suddenly took on a very human face. A movement that risked being depersonalized by its sheer scale became deeply, deeply personal, driven by individual stories of tragedy and hope.
Just 2 days after Merkel's announcement, this image of a 3-year-old Syrian Kurdish boy, Aylan Kurdi, drowned on a Turkish beach, it went global. And in a contest between head and heart, this photo made sure the heart overrode everything else. Political opposition was pretty much silenced. How could you argue for closed borders? It was like seeming indifferent to dead children.
And the stories of those who actually arrived were just harrowing. The source material recounts the testimony of this father from Afghanistan who worked for the Ministry of Education. He was kidnapped and tortured by the Taliban because he refused to help them poison schoolchildren. After he escaped and fled with his family, his relief was so simple and profound, he was just safe now.
The trauma was just immense. I mean, think about these 2 Hazara brothers from Afghanistan, a minority group targeted by ISIS. When someone asked the younger brother what he'd seen, he replied with this haunting statement. They weren't just fleeing war, they were fleeing targeted extermination. So the point is, these weren't just numbers, they were people carrying these unimaginable burdens.
So what came next? Well, after that dramatic summer of 2015, the initial welcome started to fade. A new, much harder reality began to set in, leaving thousands of people, as one source put it, stuck in paradise.
See, at the height of the crisis, the journey was this fluid northward path. You'd arrive on a Greek island, get processed in a couple of days, take a ferry to the mainland, and then you'd begin the long walk through the Balkans toward Germany or Sweden. It was a constant flow of people.
And then, just as quickly as they had opened, the doors began to shut. An EU deal with Turkey, which cost €6 billion, dramatically slowed the sea crossings. And then one by one, nations all along that Balkan route closed their borders. The flow just stopped.
This created what the source calls a bottleneck effect. Places like the Moria camp on Lesbos, which were designed as temporary processing centers, became these long-term holding pens. A stop that once took maybe 48 hours now stretched into months, sometimes even years, creating a whole new humanitarian crisis born out of frustration and despair.
So when you look back, the source really reflects on this central tension. That instinct to help, to pull people from the water and offer them safety, it was powerful. And it was maybe a necessary, civilized response. But that generous instinct, it turns out, was not the end of the story. Which leaves us with a really difficult question to ponder. Was that initial, powerful impulse to welcome everyone, was that actually the easiest part of the journey? Because for the people who crossed the water and for the continent that received them, it was just the beginning of a story whose final chapter is still being written.